Putin is smart and opportunistic. And so he will see this as an opportunity to justify Russia's invasion, saying, you have your sphere of influence, we have ours. You took out one of our friends in South America. Well, we may take out one of your friends in Eastern Europe. So he's going to say there's a parallel here. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And also in the process, establish that Russia is an equivalent to the United States, that you get to do this, we get to do this. That is something that is actually a very tenuous argument on both counts, and especially the idea of equivalency. They have nowhere near the military competence that the US has. And yet that is the way I think Putin will try to play this.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO and special envoy to Ukraine in Donald Trump's first term. Kurt is also a distinguished fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Kurt, great to have you back on.
Great to be with you, Louis. Thanks.
Well, obviously the big story at the moment, Kurt, is what has gone on in Venezuela. I just wondered if I could ask, first of all, for a general look at how this changes things on the world stage, and how countries are going to be reacting to this, perhaps even in the Kremlin as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And the first thing I want to say in response to your question is that this is dynamic. How this plays out over the next couple of weeks and months will shape the perceptions that people have later about what did all this mean. There's a lot of commentary right now, some of it very hysterical, that when you look back on it a few months from now, I say, well, maybe it wasn't actually that dramatic. But on the other hand, it could be if things really go badly. So there's a lot that we don't know. Now, having said that, there are a few things that are themes that come up with what we see now. One of them is President Trump is not an isolationist. He is willing to use engagement, pressure, even military force to do what he wants to do. This is significant. It's a big change from what we saw with the Biden administration or Trump 1 in some areas, and certainly Obama. You have a president who's willing to use military force without a UN resolution, without a vote of Congress, just to do what he wants to do. What does that mean? That means that people who are on his target list are going to be very concerned now to make sure that they're not next. That could be Cuba, that could be Colombia, could be Iran and the mullahs. I think everyone is gauging now, what does this mean? Now, at the same time, I don't think Trump wants to take on the whole world at once. I think he's focused actually on this in Venezuela, and he knows that it's important that it work out okay. So I don't think they're going to be expanding this very rapidly, if at all. But it is going to cause those sorts of dictators around the world to have some pause. Now, another dynamic to this is they have quite explicitly used this idea of a sphere of influence as part of the justification, even calling it a Dunn-Roe doctrine, updating the Monroe doctrine. Well, this is something that Vladimir Putin's going to look at and say, yep, you can have Western Hemisphere. I'll take Eastern Europe. And we don't know how the Trump administration is going to feel about that. My gut feeling is that the Trump administration will say, well, we have a sphere of influence because we have a hemisphere, but nobody else does. China, you don't get all of East Asia. Russia, you don't get all of Europe. You guys have to behave, but we're going to do this. I think they see that kind of exceptionalism here. Another is all the small countries in the world, all the countries that are in some ways dependent upon a rules-based order are going to be very, very alarmed now. So what else might the US do outside such a rules-based order, and how will that affect them? And this, I think, is where a lot of European countries are coming from right now. They're not coming out and condemning this, which is interesting, because they know that Maduro was very unpopular, he was a ruthless dictator. Venezuelans are happy. They know this is probably good for Venezuela, probably good for the Western Hemisphere. So they're not going to just come out and outright criticize. But at the same time, they are alarmed at some of the implications. And they're being very careful about how they talk about this, and they are waiting to see what else happens next.
Indeed, and you mentioned Russia's reaction to this. Venezuela is a Russian ally. That much is undisputable. But at
Yeah.
the same time, this mission is not too far off what Russia attempted to do in Kiev in 2022. Are they going to be happy to see this, as you say, entirely simply because they think that they can do the same thing, therefore, on the world stage? Or will this worry them? Because there are a lot of countries not dissimilar to Venezuela in the terms of how they operate that are allied to Russia.
Yeah. Well, Louis, I'm afraid I have to disagree with you about the similarities between this and what Russia did in Ukraine in 2022 and since then. For President Trump, this was about extracting the president of Venezuela, so-called president, not recognized by the U.S. as the legitimate president. He lost the election by a landslide, and taking him into justice in the U.S. without trying to take over Venezuela, without a full-scale regime change. As someone said from the administration this morning, this is not about changing the regime, it's about changing the behavior of a regime. And so we're looking for a different set of policies, but leaving things intact and not trying to take it over. For Vladimir Putin, this was very, very different. He does not accept the idea that Ukraine is a sovereign, independent country. He doesn't accept the idea that Ukraine is a separate people from the Russians. He thinks this is all Russian prerogative to take it over. And so that's what was motivating Putin in all of this. And then as a result of that, Putin had a very ambitious military operation, ground forces rolling in, tanks, armored vehicles, at least 5 different lines of attack to try to take over the country. For the US, this was about a 3-hour operation to shut down the defenses, send in a special forces team, grab the president, and get out. So I would say very, very different. Now, to the point of your question, though, is how is Putin going to read this? Putin is smart and opportunistic. And so he will see this as an opportunity to justify Russia's invasion, saying, you have your sphere of influence, we have ours. You took out one of our friends in South America. Well, we may take out one of your friends in Eastern Europe. So he's going to say there's a parallel here. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And also in the process, establish that Russia is an equivalent to the United States, that you get to do this, we get to do this. That is something that is actually a very tenuous argument on both counts. And especially the idea of equivalency. They have nowhere near the military competence that the U.S. has. And yet that is the way I think Putin will try to play this.
Indeed. And you mentioned that Venezuela and Russia are pretty close allies. As if to demonstrate those links, there are several Venezuelan shadow fleet tankers that fled the country and ran the blockade after this invasion began or this military operation began, or even before that. One of them has now made its way across the Atlantic and changed its flag to a Russian flag. Is that likely to make US forces hesitate stopping some of these Venezuelan vessels if they decide to pretend or convince others that they're in fact Russian vessels?
Well, Russian vessels are subject to sanction as well. Not as severe as in the case of Venezuela, but they're still being watched as well. So I think that in terms of boarding and seizing the vessel, yes, I think the U.S. will probably hold off on that, but more because we've already done the military operation now. And now the issue for the U.S. is how do you get cooperation from the Maduro vice president so that she's been sworn in as the acting president, she remains in power, and the U.S. wants her to be cooperative so that we don't have to have a full occupation of Venezuela. That means they're going to be looking at something like the tankers, the vessels, as bargaining chips. Okay, how can we use them? And there's probably enough of them that we have as bargaining chips that we don't even need to worry about one that made it across the Atlantic. We'll be looking at all kinds of levers of pressure on her.
And how do you think Ukraine might be reading the events in Venezuela over the weekend? I mean, during the press conference after Nicolas Maduro was captured, Trump did kind of give a reference to Russia and Putin, saying he was angry with Putin in that press conference. Is that kind of language going to make the Ukrainians maybe feel a bit more secure about the talks that were going on over Christmas?
Well, sadly, Trump's rhetoric about Russia, especially as it relates to Ukraine, has gone, 180 degrees back and forth many times. So he did say that he's upset that Putin lied to him about the alleged drone strike against one of his houses. He's unhappy with Putin that he has not agreed to a ceasefire or agreed to any reasonable peace terms. He, on the other hand, has never really gone in for the full scale sanctions and secondary sanctions on Russia. That bill that Lindsey Graham put in the Senate over a year ago is still just sitting there. So he hasn't followed through on some of that. And then at times he's critical of the Ukrainians as well. So I think the Ukrainians are looking at this, I would say, with these couple of perspectives. One, a reassurance that U.S. military capability is significantly better than Russian-made military capability. The S-300s, S-400s were completely useless. So that's a reassurance. Second, the fact that when the U.S. is willing, we can and do actually make a decisive difference. That's encouraging for Ukraine. The language used about Putin recently, that's encouraging as well. But what's going to be concerning for Ukraine is this idea of spheres of influence again. They will worry that Trump will look at South America as saying, yes, that's an American interest, whereas Ukraine, there's no real American interest there.
Yeah, and you mentioned that rejection by Trump that we heard yesterday, saying that he didn't believe the Kremlin claim that there'd been a drone attack on Putin's Valdai residence, a bit north of Moscow. There was a moment where he said, maybe it did happen, maybe it didn't. Was there ever a risk that the White House were going to buy this story? It never really seemed particularly believable from people here in Europe.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this yesterday because we were having a conversation going through exactly that. Why did the White House not buy this? And I think if there had been a bombing and the Russians were accusing the Ukrainians were denying it, could very well have been the White House would have accepted that the Ukrainians might have done this. But what the clincher was in this was there actually wasn't any bombing. It wasn't just that the Russians claimed the Ukrainians did it and the Ukrainians are denying it. It actually didn't happen. And that, I think, was the clincher for President Trump and the White House to say, okay, this is ridiculous.
And on top of that, if this had been an attack by Ukraine on a residence of Putin, why would that go down badly in Washington necessarily? I mean, Russia bombs Kiev every
Yeah.
week at the moment. An attack on Putin or senior Russian leadership seems like it would be what you would expect when two nations are at war.
Right. And unfortunately, that's one of the quirks of the way Trump is going about negotiations and foreign policy. He personalizes everything. So you're absolutely right. Who cares if Ukraine takes out one of Putin's houses? So what? But because of this dynamic where President Putin sees everything personally, he's dealing with Putin personally, he's dealing with Zelensky. He is the one talking about this all the time. He's the only spokesperson for the administration. So when it's personal like that, and then one of the actors tells him, oh, they tried to bomb my house, he reacts to that as if it were his house. And so it is a different dynamic in the way Trump is going about things compared to what the substance really should dictate.
And where do you think all of this leaves the peace talks as we come into 2026? I mean, there were even discussions of meetings going on sometime after Christmas. Obviously, we did see a Trump a Trump Zelensky meeting not long ago. Where are we now? Do you think it does feel a bit like we've come full circle to a
Right.
Russian rejection?
Right, Louis, you and I have had this conversation over the last year and a half at least. There will not be a peace agreement. Putin will never agree to any reasonable end of the war and say, okay, that's it, I'm satisfied. He wants more. He wants all of Ukraine. He wants a demilitarized Ukraine. He wants a change in the Ukrainian government. He wants no security guarantees. He wants no European coalition of the willing force deployed. He wants no armament of Ukraine, and on and on and on. He wants everything, and he's not going to agree to anything unless that's what it says. So what we're going to end up with is rounds and rounds of talks, as we see in Paris now, that are not going to go anywhere. They're not going to result in a peace agreement. And only pressure, only secondary sanctions, financial pressure, long-range weapons, assured supply of weapons and ammunition, defeats on the battlefield, only those sorts of things that apply pressure to Putin will cause him at some point to say, okay, we'll have a ceasefire. And that ceasefire will never be understood by Putin as an endpoint, just a pause. But we have to do everything possible to turn that pause into something permanent. We have to strengthen Ukraine militarily, economically, politically, do the deployment of a coalition of the willing, provide security guarantees, keep the screws on Russia until we can establish a strong deterrence to prevent future Russian attacks. That's the way this is going to go. I hope that we accelerate this process now, and maybe feeling emboldened in Venezuela, maybe President Trump will. But we can either do as we've been doing, which drags this process out, or we can accelerate it by increasing the pressure on Putin as quickly as we can.
And as we've just before we started speaking, there are reports coming out of that meeting of the European coalition of the willing leaders, that there may be some sort of agreement now that the US will back a European multinational force that could go in if there is some sort of pause in the fighting. Does that make it more likely that we are closer to some sort of stop, at least ceasefire, whatever word you might use? Or is that actually more likely to push the Russians not to stop fighting because they don't want that force in country?
Yeah, I think the latter is where the Russian reaction will be. This will not be something that causes them to agree. It'll be something that will cause them to not want to agree. But that's okay. We never expected them to agree anyway. And so I think in terms of does it speed up a conclusion, that really comes back to what we were talking about sanctions pressure, financial pressure, military pressure. Putin has got to feel that. So far, he hasn't. But this is a good step. It's not a surprising step. I think this was clear all along. This is where this would end up. But it is in itself not going to be changing the dynamic. That dynamic will only change when Putin feels he has to end the war.
And if Russia's objective is to kind of keep dragging out these talks that the US is residing over, do you think it's likely we will see another Putin meeting with Trump or anyone else for that matter in 2026? I mean, it seems to be a kind of thing that Russia offer when they want to keep the US engaged.
Yeah, I think that President Trump has, been chastened a little bit by having that Alaska summit where he got absolutely nothing. He thought that he was going to have a deal. He thought he was doing nice for Putin. He thought Putin would be reasonable. He had Witkoff telling him all this as well. And it was nothing at all. I mean, no give, no movement, no ceasefire, no peace agreement. And that ended up meaning they had to cancel the lunch. They canceled the business-to-business meetings. It actually was a setback, if you will, in terms of Trump's thinking how he's going to move this along. So now Trump, I think, is more cautious about agreeing to a meeting with Putin Calling him on the phone, sure, he'll do that routinely. But actually setting up a summit meeting, he asked Marco Rubio to take care of that the last time. Rubio spoke with Foreign Minister Lavrov, who told him that no, we're not going to agree to anything. In which case, Rubio said, and then we shouldn't have the meeting. I think that is still the dynamic in place now, and they will only have a follow up meeting when it is clear that there is something to be agreed.
And the other major security issue that is on the lips of most European leaders at the moment is Greenland. Trump has said in recent days, we need it for national security right now. How big is the risk here of some sort of conflict or near conflict arising over Greenland?
Yeah, I am still optimistic that the risk of conflict over Greenland is non-existent or very, very low. Trump says these things, and he's saying it for his base. But the reality is, the U.S. does not need Greenland for U.S. national security because we have full rights to do whatever we need to do militarily in and around Greenland under the existing treaty we have with Denmark. So the Prime Minister of Denmark is absolutely right when she says you don't need Greenland. Greenlanders don't want to be part of the U.S. and you can do anything you want there. And I think you'll have many people, especially members of Congress, senators, media, administration, who will push back on this idea that the U.S. has to take over Greenland from a NATO ally. I just don't think that's going to happen. Trump likes this tough talk, but Putin does too. But Trump likes this tough talk, but I don't see this really going anywhere.
And is there anything, though, that Greenland or NATO could offer to Trump? I mean, larger military presence, anything at all that might cool down the rhetoric on this then, if it is more of an appeal to his base? Or are we going to have to bear with these claims to Greenland for the next 3 years of Trump's presidency?
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to bear with it because Denmark has offered things and done things, not just offered, done things. They've invested in the infrastructure that are there, the military infrastructure. They're investing in, I believe, radar capabilities, ships. They are offering to the U.S. increased host nation support. They're offering to the U.S. increase your military presence. It's wide open. There's no restrictions here. This doesn't stop the rhetoric coming from President Trump and the White House, which appears not to be based in substance. It appears to be based in this general idea we need to have Greenland without any specifics as to, well, what do you want to do if you have Greenland?
And how do you think the US base will be reacting to this perhaps change in Trump's foreign policy? I mean, we had heard there wouldn't be as many foreign conflicts under a new Trump administration. Do you think they will be supportive of what's gone on in Venezuela, and would they be supportive of more acts like this around the globe, or could this rein the MAGA movement back in?
Right. This brings us right back to where we started the interview. It depends how it goes. The MAGA movement is uncomfortable with the idea that we're just going to use military force, engage in regime change, maybe engage in nation building. This is the kind of thing that Trump ran against. And the MAGA movement is concerned about this. However, they're being quiet right now because it appears to have been successful. And if it continues to be successful, a few months from now, everything is fine, I think that they're not going to say anything, and I don't think it will have much of an impact. But if it starts to go badly, as the invasion in Iraq went badly after a few years, then I think you're going to see that MAGA base really pull away from President Trump and this saying we should have never done it.
Well, Kurt Volker, former US ambassador to NATO, thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Pleasure to see you, Louis. Thank you.